in our 10-story Manhattan apartment following Hurricane Sandy, where we finally were able to safely walk down the 10 flights of stairs and out into the flood-struck city. People were checking into the few open cafes who were running on diesel power. One kind coffee house set up a power bank for folks to recharge their phones so that we could update loved ones. Detritus was everywhere. At least one building completely lost its facade, leaving it open like a perfect, giant-sized dollhouse. A chunk of pier, not a piece of wood, a chunk of pier, rested in the middle of Avenue B and 20th Street. The traffic lights were out for a good 40 blocks, and taxis were never so polite, and crosswalks never so regular. People were at our best. Countless numbers of trees were knocked down, power was out, food was spoiled. And then I came upon that rose you see there on the screen, the one that's up on the screen right now. Cars and trucks and buses were still strewn about on 14th Street, where the storm left them dead. And this single rose survived the storm in pretty immaculate condition. That's my excellent photography. Alex, take it. I used to hear the song we just sang, I Know This Rose Will Open, as a perfect instance of maudlin fake solace. I want music to feel more real, to open our senses to the difficulties in the world, and offer a way through them without ignoring them. And the lyrics used to feel like they were offering empty promises. That's until I met this rose. Maudlin stops being maudlin in the face of everyday miracles. When I was a teenager, I kept myself busy. That's a character flaw I've yet to grow out of. I replaced lunch with an honors class. I replaced study hall with choir. I stayed after school for cross country or theater. Is this relating to anybody here? Yeah. I was at the gym 5 days a week and ran 7 miles a day right after school. I tried to control every bit of my day so that I could feel like I was succeeding. I was finding the fullness of time, but not the fullness of life. I also had the competing desires to lose weight and put on muscle. I was about 55 pounds lighter than I am now, and I thought I was fat. It's amazing how the pressure we put on our youth and the pressure our youth put on themselves can translate in weird ways. Ways that bring harm to our teens that we never imagine or wish upon them. I remember the day after working out for an hour in the gym and running the usual 7 miles on top of that, when I looked down at my leg and realized what I had been seeing as fat was in fact muscle. I was so busy trying to achieve something more than I thought I had that I stopped allowing myself to see what I was already at. One of my mentors, the Reverend Forrest Church, would often remind us to want what you have. It's difficult advice to hear or live by. I already had what I wanted, but I couldn't see that. That phrase would often remind me of my teenage years and how not wanting what I had kept me from appreciating and living the fullness of life. I don't know what shifted inside me that allowed me to see me for who I was. It's probably the first moment of grace that I can vividly recall. I've had others, but I was too young to remember them. Being born was probably my very first moment of grace. We come into this world and through no fault or effort of our own, right? That we know of at least. That moment in the gym felt like that. So many people hold on to poor body image for years, unable to free themselves from the traps of the mind. I woke up, but I didn't do anything to wake up. I just did. Moments like this echo backwards and forwards through time for me. They resonate with that rose in the hurricane, bending toward the light, unfurling its petals as a gracious rebuff to the destruction all around, despite the absurdity of its possibility. Openness. Openness to ourselves, to others, to loving ourselves or others, doesn't always come, but when it does, we don't achieve it through effort or actions. It's a gift that we allow to happen. We can get in the way, or we can simply be. But sometimes we learn to love ourselves. Sometimes the rose does open. Parenting or success in our careers can be very similar creatures. We don't always have control over what comes from our love or care. We don't always know which way the road will turn, what will happen to our kids, or what jobs we'll lose. Some of us have huge families we're born into and love. Others have a tight-knit family they've made by their own care and effort. Careers can be the same. We can fall into the vocation of our dreams or cobble together a living from so many different parts of our lives. Often when we're teens, dealing with school or considering college, for those that are going that route, we're given a false roadmap, one that many of us continue to buy into throughout all our lives. We'll work hard at school, we'll make or fail the tests that matter. By our junior year in high school, we'll know what major we'll focus on for college, and that's what we'll be doing the entirety of our lives. Frankly, it's a silly map, one that will only get us lost if we trust it too much. There should be a legend at the bottom of that map that we're given as kids that reads, "Objects may appear closer than they really are." I started studying out environmental science at Rutgers College. I dropped out within 2 months, started up again a year later studying teaching at Montclair State University, then English, then changed my major to anthropology, then added in archaeology, and I finally ended on religion. I graduated and went to work in computers for the next 5 years. Funny, right? We tie ourselves in knots throughout our lives by hoping we can control what comes next, as if our best laid plans will come together as expected. Sometimes they will. Most of the time, they won't. It doesn't mean that we don't plan. We have to plan if we want to have any chance of getting to where we want to go. Spiritually, we go off course when we think the map we've drawn is the same as the life we hope to live. The map, the plans, the details are not the fullness of life. They're the fullness of time. The art of growing up is learning to leverage those details to enjoy our life, but not to replace our life with the to-do lists. Or in parenting, who here has ever read a book about parenting? A third of you. The rest of you are much wiser than the rest of us. So many of these books tell you how wrong you are, or how right you are, or how to hover over your kids, or how to not hover over your kids. It's like reading an owner's manual to a car, except you don't know which car it's for. It's just for cars. My favorite parenting book is called Nurture Shock. It's my favorite because it never intended to be a parenting book, even though it's a parenting book. The biggest lesson I learned, I took from it, is a simple truth that all the tricks, tips, and things we can do for our kids, the most important lesson we can give them is that when the nearly verbal child points at a spoon, we in return say, "Spoon." Everything else are details. That's the essential lesson in life, being mindful to the moments when our best course of action is to simply say, "Spoon." Whether growing up throws at you challenges around continuing school or career or parenting or not parenting, we struggle to learn to live life in the fullness of the life before us, not clinging to the to-do or the details or the fretting over what might be or never was. Over the course of a life, all our choices lead us to who we become. We may feel trapped by what we once were, both good and bad. Both are always part of us, as the good and the bad is there to the person sitting in your chair today. But we're not trapped in any one of our many lives we lived. Doors close, doors open. Sometimes through our actions, and sometimes despite our actions. Beyond what we can control are the moments of grace. For me, grace came in each career rebirth, from computer guru to community development specialist to religious educator to congregational minister. There were things that I accomplished to make each happen. But being open to the possibility of change was not an act that could be measured anywhere on any map. In all our struggles, it is possible to hit the reset button when we need. I only know that it rarely seems possible until we actually do. Sometimes the rose does open. For years, I would spend the night of Christmas Eve over at the house of a close friend's grandmother, along with her extended family. The family friend's grandma wasn't blessed with good mobility in her elder years, but she had her clarity, kindness, and wicked Scrabble moves. I still attribute some of my mad Scrabble skills to learning from one of the greats in the game. Her home would be decorated in every corner for the holidays. We'd attend worship at her Baptist church and follow it with the best Chinese takeout made to order. Those Christmas Eves were something I cherished. My own grandmothers had passed years ago, and this was one way to see them again. Then one day, she had a stroke and should have died, but the visiting caregiver resuscitated her against her previously written instructions. The clear-thinking grandmother I knew never really came back. Now relegated to a nursing home, there would be no more Christmas Eves and no more takeout Chinese food. The dementia that set in was strange, as so often it is. When her granddaughter and I would visit her in the nursing home, she would completely remember me. The part of the brain that stored the memory of meeting me remained largely intact. But her granddaughter would be a stranger to her. She would remember her own children as if they were still in their teens. That's where she was. Time didn't mean the same thing any longer. The year would be in the 2000s with me, in the 1960s for her kids, and her grandkids didn't really fit anywhere. That fits well into what many of us would consider a nightmare. You prepared as best you could, handling the paperwork you needed to handle, raised an awesome family that you loved and who loved you well into your 80s, who even brought their friends around to spend time with you for the holidays because you were just that awesome. And chance rolls snake eyes. Memories blend, disappear, and you're no longer self-sufficient. You're helpless, confused, and don't recall many of the highest points of your life, while your loved ones watch, helpless themselves, to change or heal what will remain broken. That can happen. That can be what chance brings us. For some of us, we're carefully treading in this territory right now, whether for ourselves noticing some things slipping more readily from our minds, or for our loved ones, wondering how we will cope with slowly losing the person we knew. There are practical matters that need to be attended to, medical advice that might be sought after, or financial concerns that should be addressed. Each of these can matter immensely to our quality of life, and yet, our perspective may matter the most for our sense of wholeness. How do we view the changes beyond being horrified or fearful? For me, the moment of grace was in the witnessing her granddaughter still visiting her daily or weekly. She still visited even though she wasn't recognized anymore as her granddaughter. Grace is found when we focus on the relationships we built and whose love continues on in our passing. There's no thing we do that makes this love endure. There's no thing we do. We don't deepen our love in the fullness of time, or with busyness or tasks. We make eternal our love through the fullness of life. I want to live my life in such a way that should the worst happen in my elder years, I know the people around me, the granddaughters in my world, will still love me and try their best to make my close as peaceful as possible, knowing that I help to make their life as joyous as possible. You can't quantify that, and it's what life is about. It's what we mean when we speak of reverence at its core. Being in awe of the depth of humanity, being in love with the possibility of the human spirit, are unfurling even when its bud is swaying in the storm. It is not given to us to know when our bud will open. It is given to us to know that it may be at any time, again and again and again. Blessed be and amen.